So, Anita, if people were to remember you by only your words, what would those words be?
We create purpose through the challenges that we face. You know, before my husband got sick, I had felt like I had been through the challenge of being an entrepreneur, of not getting investment in my business and I had to shut it down because I got pregnant. All these little things that I've experienced with inequality in the workplace. And those gave me the purpose. You can sulk in those moments or you can look for that purpose and see how you can help others. And that's what I did for years in the private sector. And then that's why I wanted to bring it to the public sector, is how can I help others with that? And then when my husband got sick, people always ask me, we know this was a hard decision. How do you keep going? How do you keep doing this? Take time with your family. And for me, it was, if I don't turn this into something that helps me move forward, but also others, then I don't feel like I'm honoring that challenge came into my life. There's a reason for everything. And if we don't learn from good or bad, then I don't think we're moving forward.
Politics, to me, contrary to what we seem to feel these days, has always had an inspiring place in my heart. To me, being an American was a feeling before anything else. I've always held onto a very deep sense of what could be possible when I think of being an American. I think this reflects back at us in different ways, and I think there's no better example of this reflection than our politics. This episode was my first sit down with a politician. Her name is Anita Malik, and she is running in 2020 to represent Arizona's District 6 in the U.S. House of Representatives. You know, I often refer to politics as the art of the possible. My conversation with Anita was a fascinating look at what she thinks is possible. Without further delay, I give you Anita Malik.
I was the 2018 Democratic nominee for Arizona's 6th District, running here in this district. And I have decided to recommit to that process and run again. And so we are in the early stages of building kind of the structure of what you would do for a campaign. You know, 2020 seems a bit away, but it's really right here.
Yeah.
And so we're feeling that pressure, and we're going. So, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit about where I'm at the moment.
Right, yeah. And just walking in here, we were kind of joking about how there's so much time, but there's no time at all.
Yeah,
when it comes to it. Because right now we're in August of 19 and almost a full year, but there's so much prep work, I imagine. Can you talk around like the type of things that you're thinking about right now in your timeline?
The biggest thing I think for us is really developing out the ground strategy. So I'm very big on, I don't run a traditional campaign. I don't come from a political or campaign background. You know, I come from the tech world, from an operational background and from marketing. And so for me, it's about looking at your demographics. It's about reaching people, hearing their stories, bringing those inputs in, just like you would in a business when you're looking at your customers, right? I mean, It's really about how do you develop that connection, that relationship. So the ground game and building out the strategy is what we're spending most of our prep time these few months on. Some fundraising, but really for me, it is that how am I going to reach and connect with people enough to close the gap that we saw last time. You know, we got pretty far, but we have to continue that. And where are those stories? What are people talking about? Where are those different communities of people? And some of that's going out to different events. It's interacting with groups that maybe we weren't able to get to last time. The benefit of it's so early is that we have more time this time, and we have the data behind us to actually achieve that. So it's exciting from that standpoint, but you also feel like, okay, do I have to hurry up and wait? Do I have to, you know, who is intrigued at this point in this election, which again, you know, the primary itself is now finally under the year mark, which is nice. It's next August 4th, 2020. But yeah, I mean, the average voter is concerned with their daily life. And so to me, if you run a campaign that's about getting someone to vote, that's I don't believe that would work, right? I want to run a campaign that's about connecting with people in their spaces and their places on the issues that they're concerned about that are affecting them today, not this possibility of what could come from legislation down the road.
So like, I mean, you were kind of mentioning just a minute ago, you know, your background being in tech.
Yes.
Just for people that might just be coming across your stuff maybe for the first time or very early in the stage of discovering who you are, what transitioned you into, you know, or triggered you to act in this capacity into politics? You know, what was that? What made you go from, you know, a corporate mindset, maybe an entrepreneurial mindset to politics?
It was a combination of things, really. I think from one standpoint, it was being in the tech world and watching what was happening with the threats to our democracy for cybersecurity, the threats to our personal information, with people having to deal with their information being stolen and what's happening in the digital world, and understanding and recognizing that in DC, we didn't have leadership for that.
Right.
Knowledge, but then also people that were willing to be proactive and say, this is the kind of standards we need in place. This is the kind of stuff we need to do. And you see other countries started to take at that time those approaches, right? With GDPR and us not even moving in that direction. It was very alarming to me. So that was one point and one reason coming from the tech world. But I think the biggest push for me was just seeing that what was happening to kind of middle-class families, what was happening to the idea of the American dream in my community, and also what I felt personally, was really what prompted me to look into this and make a huge jump. I mean, I think running the tech issues is something that, you know, I would have probably lobbied for or worked on or done something with regardless. But to make that jump to go from, I'm just going to run for Congress.
Right, yeah.
which is,
I mean, it's one thing to advocate from the corporate side, lobby, et cetera, all those things. But jumping into, I'm just going to completely jump into this side of it.
Right. Yeah. You know, for me, that was really emotionally driven. It was personally driven. It was the idea of, you know, I lost my father now, 17, 18 years ago. And just, you get older, you have your own kids, you start to reflect on some of the lessons a little bit more. And his lesson to me was, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. That you don't need to constantly strive for all these goals if you feel like you're not treating yourself well in that process, or you have time with your family. And so make sure you prioritize, make sure you prioritize what really matters. And as I reflected on that and looked at what was happening politically, the notion that we've taken away this idea of what I call the work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem like a political talking point,
right.
But to me it is.
Now.
It is,
yeah.
Right? Because people are working 2 to 3 jobs. People don't know if there's going to be retirement security with Social Security. The sandwich generation, which I'm a part of, is feeling that strain on all ends. Education, you know, costs have gone up. If you have young kids, there's, you know, daycare in itself is sometimes more than a college education.
Right.
It's taking women out of the workplace. We're fighting for equal pay. The issues were just mounting, and I could feel that pressure in my own life. And so it frustrated me that I lived in a district with a representative that wasn't accessible, that wasn't really showcasing the values that I support in Washington and voting in the way that I think the most of the district would want for our families, not about party, but about those family core issues.
Right.
So that really got me to say, you know what, I'm going to leave my job as a COO. I'm going to do this because the ideas of that dream, I just think we're being lost and still are.
Right.
And that's what keeps me in it.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, Arizona has, at least as long as I've lived here, and you know this as well, like it's always been considered a pretty deep red state. I mean, just like in the notion of it, right? But even in the last election, you know, things look a lot more purple. Things look a lot different than just straight red.
Right.
I mean that's a very general way of talking about it. But like, what did you see in your first campaign? Like, did you have any insights or nuances that you didn't expect? Like, what did you see talking to people on the ground in terms of their views on what's going on? Are people even aware right now of the type of changes that are coming, or is it more they feel like they know the answer. You know, what's the consensus right now?
I think that's the hard thing, is that we look for consensus. And, you know, I always say that this isn't about seeking consensus and finding it. It's about building it. Yeah. And what I found that was probably the two things that I think were the key to this really was, one, that people do connect with that idea of these are family issues. And our families are similar, even if they're very different, right? Because we have similar concerns. We are concerned about our health care. We're concerned about Social Security and Medicare. We're concerned about where our kid's going to go to school and is it a good education and their safety, right? Those things bring us together as a community. And so we were able to, you know, it's definitely, it's a nuanced approach to, I think, what traditional politics is, which is I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican and these are our talking points. Right. And what I was able to learn from people, because people offered this to us, was that if you just listen, you're going to find that common ground. Yeah. And that really became the cornerstone of our campaign. I think the other thing is that the average voter doesn't understand campaign finance rules and, you know, all the nuances to that, but they understand corruption. Yeah. And I think that is the driving force right now, is money in politics. And when we were at the doors, particularly with independent voters, you know, they're just like, yeah, that's the problem, so I don't want to deal with it. Right. You know, why are they not voting?
They're just disengaged.
They're disengaged. Right. Why are they not voting? Because of that. And so it's a big issue for me to tackle. And I think I hate this word because then people say this, but it's a big issue for me being an outsider into politics. Yeah. I don't love that label. I don't believe in labels, but coming from a different, right, you know, going from a private to public sector and saying, look, I'm not here to say that I'm an expert in politics per se, right? But I do believe in our democracy, and I can give you a different perspective of why I think it's not working. Right. And money as a whole is a big issue. I could obviously get into the weeds, but to me, that I think that's resonating with people, and that's really important.
I mean, we've seen it for a while now. I mean, it's almost like exhausting to even mention that there's such a huge divide between the right and the left, you know, in so many different ways in the mainstream conversation. You know, I was listening to an interesting Freakonomics podcast. I don't know if you listen to them every once in a while, but they had a segment on duopolies. And in that segment, they talk about how money in politics, and they look at Republicans versus Democrats as a duopoly. And when you look at it that way, it makes a lot more sense that they're very good as groups in sustaining themselves in this political economy. And what they were kind of getting at was interesting, and I'd like your take on it, was they were saying that, you know, money in politics is one thing, but another thing is the way we end up voting and having, you know, the incentives are misaligned in terms of having a primary vote first between, you know, Democrats have their own primary, Republicans have their own. So it incentivizes a very extreme viewpoint right out the gates. But if there were bipartisan primaries, then you would have to appeal to a much broader audience, and that could tone down the extremes on both sides. Right. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
That's really interesting. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that, because I just was saying this actually at a meeting right before we started this podcast, where what happens from my experience last time is I really ran a campaign that I was proud of, both my primary and general, but that it was really true to what the message I wanted to give was in the primary. I was able to do that. I was able to talk about the tech issues. Right. I was able to talk about this idea of the work-life balance. And it was, I think, refreshing to people. It was different. Yeah. And it was what I believe. You know, we were very authentic about it. And then suddenly, without your even, you know, we still were trying to push that, but it was hard. You win. And now you're just the Democratic candidate. Right. And it almost felt like it didn't matter all the things I wanted to say, because I was just these Democratic platform talking points. Even though we still tried to do that, it really felt like it got lost. And part of that's because we didn't have a lot of time, but I think you just become that for the average voter. Yeah. And so, to their point, I mean, breaking through that it's pretty tough. Right. And in what we're trying to accomplish is to rise above this idea that we're outnumbered in registrations and pull this off. We have to break through that. And I think money is the big it is. I love the duopoly idea because it's true. Because this is on both sides. No one likes it when we say that, right? About your own party.
Right.
But it is. It's a business model.
Yeah.
But so that's what I've tried to look at it from a business perspective and say, okay, but you see businesses, startups,
Right.
don't have the money, can't hire the big leagues, can't bring in the marketing. How do they do it? They community build. So to me, that's what a democracy should be. It's about the community. It's about the voter. So I've always tried to pivot that way. And that's a principle of mine, is to model and run the campaign that I believe is best for democracy, even if the outside or the insiders are telling me you can't because you need all this money and you have to do this and you won't win. But I could play the game to win.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that proves anything.
Right.
And I'm here to prove that both to be in office to solve some problems, but also to prove that you can do this, and we can all then start to see that and model it and actually make it real.
So like, I think you're playing more of I think the merit of what I'm saying should outshine the gesturing of it, instead of just manipulating it to the point where I win, and I'm doing air quotes right now.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah. So instead of just saying I did it, I won, the merit of what you're saying, the ideas that you're trying to push forward, they should hold on their own.
Yes.
Is what you're trying to do. And I think that's really important, because it's a harder approach, I think, with all of these mechanics going against you. But I feel like, in one way, I feel like the average voter, that would be the best way to engage them naturally. Like for them to actually feel compelled to, okay, fine, I think it's doable.
Right.
I think that's very interesting. So like going through your first campaign, I'm sure it was a whirlwind because it was your first time doing it, and coming from, have you seen a difference in what we would call like the corporate culture and the political culture when you're interacting with different, figureheads in this arena? Like, have you seen like any nuances that are kind of funny, or are they all, is it kind of the same?
Yeah. I think it's funny you use the word politics, but the inner politics, like we all say in corporate culture, right? That's there in both cases. I think that the difference, if there is a difference, I think coming from the corporate world and being in positions where I always, had large teams and had to really be that mediator a lot of times and to get things done, is that I feel like in corporate culture, and obviously it's in companies that succeed, is you have differences, you recognize the differences. People don't always agree on how to get something done, but you come together as a team and you get it done, right? And you have usually good leadership that helps with that, because you have to, right? And when you're in politics, even within not necessarily legislating, but trying to just run within your own party structure, I don't think that mentality has carried over enough.
Interesting.
And I think that's part of why we're here in this country, is that we've lost the idea that it's okay to have differences of opinion.
Yeah.
It's okay to have different takes and perspectives, but things will not move forward unless you actually come together. And to find leadership that does that is something that I found very, that was very eye-opening to me going into the political world. If you had to find a difference between the two worlds, that was definitely something where I think we're lacking that mentality.
And I think that's interesting you say that, because I feel like it's such a huge, like when you say in the party, we're talking in so many different levels. Like, you're talking on the state level, but I'm sure it kind of carries into the federal level and the bigger, so like it's a huge culture to shift into this type of conversation. Like going through your first campaign, like what was your biggest takeaway? Like what went wrong? What went right?
That's a good question, because I think that I feel very strongly about what we did. I think really time was always something that I felt we didn't have enough of. So for me, it was more building upon these notions that I brought to the table, these operational notions.
Right.
And so I don't think anything in particular went wrong, but what we weren't able to successfully do is, again, kind of taking it back to how do you treat your customers? Is you look at them, you look at what their inputs are so that you can figure out how to best target them. Right. Is when you don't have enough time to do that, in particularly in the general election, because it's so short here in Arizona, you can't really have your different constituency groups, is kind of how we're looking at it this time. and understand their pain points. Because what I think the mistake we do as a whole in campaigns, and this is changing, is we look at everybody as a voter.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't really we're starting to break it down. You see, African American voters did this here and this, but it's not in an organic way that we're really having outreach with these constituency groups and really understanding their pain points. And so what I've took from the last time is if I had more time to do that in a really genuine way, because I care, and get to more groups than I did last time. We did do a lot of that, but there's so many different ways to look at who a voter is and to understand who they are. You're a working mom who's also this, and maybe it's your, maybe with your church or whatever it is, is people connect in different ways.
Right.
And I really want to get into that, back to that community building where you're connecting in those unique ways, and just having more time, I think would have made a big difference in that. I think also not being afraid. If I had to say one mistake that as a team we acknowledged was some of the idea of being afraid of maybe traditionally very conservative voters that would never vote for Anita, right?
Oh, okay.
And not really trying to target them as heavily, and trying to think that we needed to, there's always the argument in politics of can you really persuade somebody depending on where they are, right? Or do you just need to engage more turnout on your side? And what is that mix and what is that balance? And there's no clear answer, but we're looking at it this time saying that balance is a little different than last time. And I think I believe in being fearless. And so there's nothing, if I'm going to be the underdog, I'm the underdog. It's fine.
Right.
What do you have to lose?
Right.
And I want to embrace that more, because I think that actually makes you sharper in your message.
Well, one question I had around that is, where do this drive, this inspiration that you get, on the last campaign, you a little bit talked about your family background. Where does this entrepreneurial spirit come from? Have you ever been able to kind of source that?
My dad worked for, employers most of his career, but always wanted to start his own business. And towards the end of his career, he did run his own consulting firm. And so I've always guessed that it's come from there.
Right.
Because it was one of those things, he came to this country as an immigrant with nothing really.
Right.
He was very lucky to get a scholarship to come to USC to do his master's. And I think his cultural training and his family kind of background was like, you work hard, you got to provide for your family, you got to do all these things. And so he stayed in very traditional paths to make sure all that was there.
Right.
And then he finally was able to start his own business. But I think he always had that in him, wanted to. And he raised us to really embrace the idea of the American dream, which is that if you work hard, you can achieve. And so my brother and I both became these people that have taken different risks in our career, have done things differently. And I think it's to attribute to that, because that was what he taught us that you could do here.
Right.
And so, full circle, it kind of led me, I've been an entrepreneur, I've taken risks, I've done different things. And I think then, again, seeing where we are economically as a country and how maybe as a woman, I can't have it all.
Right.
That's a frustrating place to be. And then you look at policy and it kind of came full circle for me.
So, running in your first campaign and then again now, can you kind of give us a glimpse of how this has affected just your family life? It's a huge, being in places, talking with people, talking with your potential voters and everything, it can be cumbersome. How did it affect the first time running through, and what do you think you'd change anything going into this process now, or is it kind of what you have to deal with being in this type of field?
I think that I'm going to go to your last. I wasn't going to start there, but your last point about, is it just part of being in this type of field? Before I decided to run last time, I met with a lot of people in politics, consultants, just people that had advice. And I remember distinctly one person saying, well, you're not going to be able to tuck your kids in at night, most nights. And I left that meeting, and it was a very determined thing for me. I was like, well, I'll prove you wrong.
Yeah.
I will tuck my kids in at night, and I have, we didn't say this, but I have 2 little boys. And so it was important to me to find that balance. And so I made a concerted effort to make sure that we balanced it enough that I was around. I wasn't there every night, of course, right? But that it wasn't consistent nights away from the kids. It wasn't, and people look at that one of 2 ways. one perspective on that is, well, then you're not cut out for the job.
Right. That's the classic thing you would think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then, but to me, and my counter to that is that if we want to change, and we all are going to complain about what DC looks like, right? And we want to change that. We want representation to be truly of the people. We have to start looking at that different too, because I believe someone that's connected to their family and has those values in place and they're strong is going to be much more successful representing us and legislating for us than someone that's so far removed and doesn't have that connection back because they just are living in their office and not really seeing their children, right? I mean, whatever that is, grandchildren, children. Right. And so for me, it was to counter that always.
Right.
And it was hard. Let's never underestimate how hard it was. But, you know, I think of all people that surprised me the most when get asked the question, well, who's going to take care of her kids, is my mom. Right. Because you would think someone that's raised traditionally in the Indian culture would have said, yeah, you know, you should take care of your kids first.
Right.
But her answer shocked me to people because it was, well, that's what working moms have to do now. You know, this isn't any different than what another working mom would do. The schedule's a little bit harder, but it's also just balancing and figuring it out. So my husband, luckily, is in his own business. Mm-hmm. So when I'm doing, you know, things at night, he can watch the kids. He has flexibility during the day. Like, we just kind of switched our times. And so I'd spend more time with them in the mornings, getting them to school or daycare or whatever. That, you know, they've grown up a little in the last 2 years. But we really were able to make it work. And it's a partnership and it's a team. And as hard as it was on the family, the one thing that got us back into it this time, and the one thing we reflected on, was the community that we built. Mm-hmm. And we have such amazing people around us now. Mm. And we all felt this hope that it's such an incredible feeling. It's so hard to put into words. Right. But the idea that in a district that no one ever tried to even make change before, that this could happen. I mean, that carried people, and that hope brought people together. So many new friendships were formed, you know, between our volunteers, amongst themselves. Right. I know people hang out now, you know, even with us. And so we're very grateful for that experience. We wouldn't have had it otherwise.
I think one thing that struck me about what you were doing in the last campaign, and this is more of a personal take on it, you know, there's one thing to say, okay, well, there's a group of people that aren't going to vote for me. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. Mm-hmm. So if we spend time there, it's not going to help us. But I think there's a difference between making that decision not to engage with that type of audience, mm-hmm. and the difference between someone saying, okay, I'm still not voting for you, but I respect you. Right. And I think that underlying value is what starts the change mm-hmm. that people want to see. It's how I ran last time. It's really just about, I want to hear about you. How are your kids? Like, getting to really understand people in this community. I mean, I grew up here. I already have a very, like, I would say, large network. But it's amazing to know really people's stories. You know, I think stories are so effective in creating change, mm-hmm. and everybody has a story, right? And if you can dig into that story, you can also get to know their world and their people, and that's kind of that's community building to me. So, you know, I think I'm really trying to keep with both, but in a bigger fashion this time. Yeah. You know, I think we know what worked and what didn't. And we're excited to just like the calendar to change to 2020 at this point. Right. That would be great. Yeah. So. Like, with your pulse on what's going on, what do you think are the top things on people's minds right now in terms of things we need to fix or things we need to address? Healthcare and safety. So if you're not safe, gun safety is a top issue. If our kids aren't safe, if our communities aren't safe, the rest of that doesn't matter, right? Yeah, I mean I saw those photos of those bulletproof backpacks and stuff, and I'm just like, where are we getting to? Right. And you're a parent with young kids, and you're like, imagine all of us in that force, how much that force is to be able to make that change, because we don't want our kids growing up like that. I don't want to send my kids to school with this is the new norm. Right. It cannot be our new normal. Right. So I think that's number one, and then healthcare for the same reason. If you don't have your health, like my dad said, you don't have anything. Right. And we continue to, instead of making any progress on improving healthcare for even one family, right? Because there's so much nuance and complexity to healthcare. Instead of doing that, we're just fighting to take it away.
to me, that's something that I will not stop fighting. And I've made that very clear and I'm not going to ever hedge on what I believe or how my policy is going to be just to win an election, because that's not going to get us anywhere in healthcare.
So speaking of healthcare, in the last campaign, your family had a very personal scare towards the end of it.
Yes.
So, your husband, and I'll let you talk about the condition and stuff and what you ended up discovering, but can you talk around how that affected not only your campaign, but like your family and just your Medium article, which I'll link in the podcast. I think people should read, is very telling of the types of, at least for me, the types of symptoms that we're all dealing with when it comes to why you're fighting for healthcare, what that means. Like, I feel like you saw the teeth of that argument firsthand. Can you talk a little bit around what happened?
Yeah. So it was kind of a couple weeks after we won the primary, and you're in this short cycle here in Arizona to pull off a general, and he started to have flu-like symptoms and, went on for a little bit, got a little bit better. And so it just got to the point where it was not normal. You could tell something was wrong, and I took him in, and nobody expected this. It was possibly meningitis. Ended up being, he had infection in his brain. So he had 5 abscesses, which is very abnormal. This went on for 6 weeks of the general election. He was released about a week after the election, and he had several brain surgeries at the time. The hardest part about it, and everybody struggles with this when they deal with the medical system, right, is that you need to be an advocate. So that's already there, right? You're not thinking. When you have a catastrophic health event like this is somebody that was completely healthy for no rhyme or reason, and they still don't know why. He's considered a case study, why this happened, and to such an extreme. You suddenly are thrown in this situation that you can't be thinking about dollars and cents.
Right.
You're thinking about what's the best care for him, what the doctors are telling you, why are they moving him to this hospital versus this, what's happening? There was so much going on. And layer that in with what, obviously I was running a campaign, right?
Yeah.
And I have 2 little kids. And so it was a challenging time, to say the least. But people always said, well, just don't know how you do it. I would just stop. And he would have moments of extreme clarity for what he was going through, and times where we really couldn't communicate. And he just was like, we have to see this through. And that's kind of what drove me, was that he understood that I was there for him as much as I could, but I also needed to do this because this is the journey that we had set ourselves out. There was purpose behind it.
Wow.
And it was really, I don't remember. People ask me often a lot, how did you get through this, or what was that like? And honestly, a lot of it is a blur. My days were split between 3, and I decided I got to the point. I'm laughing because it sounds silly, but it's so not campaign like. I got to the point, and my team understood this. My scheduler and everybody that kind of handled events was, schedule anything you want. I will tell you the day of, if what I can do that day, where I will be. And I did something campaign every day. I was always committed to the campaign. And they got used to that. So we all had to pivot. We all had to understand that we didn't have a lot of information. I didn't have a lot of information. His case was very changing day to day. And so at the end of it all, we were people that had health insurance, paid, $16,000 or something like that in premiums over the year, paid our share of what American families always go through, is we've paid. Now you cover me, right?
Right.
Simple logic.
Yep.
Didn't happen. Our expected bills were about $40,000. Now that's, after you meet your deductibles, all that stuff that you expect to pay.
Right.
And then we had a bill come in for about $142,000.
Reading that
for 10 days.
When you shared that article, it was just jaw dropping. Thought. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No. How did you feel being a part of the system and seeing it firsthand and getting that bill?
It's hard to explain. It was shocking. You go into panic mode. We've already been through an appeal process. I think the day that I got the first appeal and they said no, there's some video of my reaction. Basically, we decided we're tracking this now because I think it's all too common American story.
Unfortunately.
And my first thought was, okay, let's sell the house. I mean, we've been through, we're not going to go bankrupt. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. We need to, and we're still dealing with it. I'm lucky to be in the position where can get advice from, people that have really been in this a little bit more. But most American families, they don't know where to turn.
Yeah.
But seeing it really put our pain of everything that we've been through to purpose. It really was one of those moments where we were still deciding, I was waiting for him to have all his health milestones before I decided to run again. That was critical. We got there, and then it was, oh, no. This is too common. We're feeling this pain. This is hurting our family. We got to figure it out. It takes a lot of, just hours of my time every week to get through everything, to deal with these claims. But I know this is happening to so many families. I can't walk away from that fight. The majority of American families that go bankrupt have health insurance.
Yeah.
This is not because we want handouts, which a lot of people want to make that the talking point.
Right.
That's the part that's the most hurtful, is that it's putting your trust in a system, right? We see that in business. Now imagine you were running a startup.
Right.
And we all bought something, you're a SaaS company and you're just making all this money off recurring subscriptions, but you didn't deliver anything.
Right.
Do you think you'd get away with that?
Right.
Right. I mean, we have allowed this. Our government has allowed this. We built this insurance model.
Right.
Right. Through legislation. So we need to fix it now. It's our duty. It's our job.
And I think that's the flip side of the coin and the positive part of it, that we built it. We can change it.
Yeah, it will take time and it will take work.
Yeah, of course, it's not that simple.
But it has to be the will, right? The will to get it done. You're right.
And I think that's, I think that's so true for a lot of people. I think people can resonate with that. You can't be shopping for in-network hospitals when you're having a heart attack. Like, what does that even sound like?
Right.
Saying that out loud just sounds silly. The way we've structured coverage and everything else, it's not for preventative care. It's not for, maximizing your health. Mm-hmm. It's for something else.
It's for profits.
Or it's a collaboration of, some people want it over here, some people want it over there. And I don't know. I feel like how are you going to, where do you think we should start this conversation when it comes to healthcare?
I think that there's some easy places to start, but they're not enough. And I say that to start our conversation on it, because politically, when you get into this sphere, and that's what is probably the biggest shift I've had to have between the two worlds, is that we want to convince voters that I'm just going to do this and it's going to fix it. And no issue, and especially healthcare, is that simple, right? I mean, everything has gray area. Everything is complicated. And with healthcare, people want to talk about more people having access and affordability. And so one place to start is public option, right? Let people buy into Medicare. Mm-hmm. To me, that's a step. It's not a solution.
Right. It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah. And it's a little bit of also a proof of concept, right? Because you're letting people come in, you're letting that system widen, you're letting people to experience that, and you're seeing the glitches that can happen, right, on the other end. But if you don't continue to move from there and get more people covered, then you're never going to have full leverage, which is the other issue, which is affordability. Because letting people buy into something is great. And, there's some theory that if you have more people buy into that, then it's a risk pool sharing. And, then obviously it's more, the premiums go down for the rest of the exchange. There's no proof to that. And I think a couple states that have done it have had very low drops in those.
Right.
And so I'm saying all that to really get to the point where if we don't get to truly a universal system and some type of Medicare for all system, and I say tight because there's a lot of proposals out there, we're not going to solve the problems.
Right.
When I have people debate me or talk to me about, okay, Mo, I have a strong public option plan and that's what it's going to be. My first thing is, okay, how would that have helped my family?
Right.
Not one way. Right. Yeah. So to say that this is something that's going to be fixed like that with one piece is not okay. But to say it's a first step is okay. So I would start there. I'd start to bring together our current single payer models. We have the VA. Mm-hmm. We have Children's Insurance Program, CHIP. We have several models like this, Medicare, Medicaid. Bring those together, learn from those, make more efficiencies, make Medicare a better program. I mean, Medicare is not perfect. We all know that. Right. It doesn't cover everything. We need to expand that. So there's a lot of steps I would take that I think I wish politically we could be doing those right now.
Right.
You know,
and you can't even have that conversation
you can't even
now.
have that conversation because right now families are struggling with all these things. This would help so many people. But
Right.
it's the situation we're in, and that's the frustrating part. So healthcare for me is politically and on the campaign, one of those issues that I think people, last cycle, it was a little bit of a struggle because I'm not willing to do an all or nothing in any scenario.
Right.
It's just not what I believe.
Right.
And I say that because if we don't, I'm watching from the outside again, that outsider thing.
Yeah.
I'm labeling myself. It's great.
It's fine. Label yourself because they're going to try anyway.
They're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
The outsider to politics. But as you watch that, you know, the political, I don't know, call it the circus, right? Whatever, that, you know, the all or nothing's not going to happen. I mean, we are so far from that as a country politically to get something like that to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and people want you to say, well, you just have to go in with that vision. I agree with the vision.
Yeah.
But if that can't happen, if we don't have the will as a country to get it done,
Right.
I'm going to make all these other steps. I'm going to fix as much as I possibly can.
Right.
I'm not going to sit back because families are suffering. And as legislators, that is what we should focus on. We should not be worried about, I need this big political win. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm not saying that anyone ever has done that, but I think we get caught in that. We get caught in this notion of, if I don't have the big thing, I can't have anything.
Right.
You know, and not to, again, bring it back to tech, but I mean,
Yeah.
you know, everything to me, that's how my brain works. But, you know, you build a product, you build what I think is a prototype. I think the ACA is a prototype, or
Right.
it's past that now. It's a working thing, but you build upon it.
Right.
You never just stop. You don't let bugs happen. You fix them. You come up with new feature sets. You make it better. You listen.
Right.
You listen to the people that are using it.
Right.
And we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone on a tangent for you now. Sorry,
No,
but I get
that's
really
fine.
passionate.
No, that's
about
fine.
this
But like, I mean, when you have these conversations with opposing views in the elected arena, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this might be a loaded question, and you may want not to answer this, but
I'll just
do you
say cut.
yeah, you're just gonna give me the air cut.
Give me the air cut.
Yeah. Do you think it's ignorance of how nuanced healthcare is, or do you think it's intellectual dishonesty, or do you think it just depends on who you talk to?
I think it depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
I think some people, and I don't think it's ignorance necessarily.
Yeah,
I think people know.
that's a harsh word in this dialogue right now. But what I mean is they just don't know.
Right. And that's what I'm saying.
You know?
People know their experience.
Right.
And that's why the story part of this is so important, because you know your experience. I know my experience, and I can talk to you for an hour about continuity of care law that doesn't affect half the families that are going through a financial systems issue with healthcare, right? And they don't know that.
Right.
I know it because it's my experience. And so what's important is to draw that out and to then see how it fits into the whole of, okay, well, we can fix that with this, or maybe we can't. Maybe this legislation doesn't do that. So thank you for bringing it in.
Right.
And so I try not to debate at kind of the constituent voter level. This is not me telling them what's right, but me explaining why I think this would help their family.
And I think that's important because in politics, at least from my perspective, not being in it, we need more people that are, and I've referred to them more as liaisons between different walks of life. Like, there's so many people that we need, people that understand healthcare and how it works and how it doesn't work and the nuances of it enough to communicate that to more people in a very simple way for them to understand that, look, this guy does, or the woman knows what she's talking about. I may not know everything she's saying, but I get it. She's in it, and that's enough for me to trust whatever she does, in the room, to legislate. Right. What is are you starting to see this movement? Like, I mean, I kind of, you come across more as a liaison to me, like someone who you're bringing, there's so much nuance, that, but you don't not answer a question because of that. You try to answer the best you can, but you also, and you're not even hedging, you're just disclaiming, like, look, there's a lot more to this, but here's a simple, at least a way to answer this question.
Right. there was a joke within my team last cycle that, well, you're the only one that ever really answers the question. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we get so caught up in the sound bites and the way to be like this. Again, it's that false narrative of it's this is your answer and I'm going to go and do this. And let's be honest, we're each one legislator in the big body. Like none of us can do anything on our own.
Right.
Yeah. and then B, you know, everything has that gray area and complexity. So, you know, I'm hopeful that we are changing that. I think that there's been a move toward people, again, to our earlier conversation about being a real person.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the label of liaison, so thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah.
That's probably one of the better ones I've ever gotten.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you get a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
because I'm the no labels person, but in that case, you know, I'd rather be what I've always said is my job. You know, if I'm so lucky to be voted in, it is to be there to hear the stories of the district, is to hear the concerns, is to hear their ideas for solutions. People have brilliant ideas, and to bring those with me back to vote on the House, or the floor of the House, excuse me. And, you know, my job is not to, again, seek consensus for what I think is right. You know, I definitely have my beliefs, but I am, even as a candidate, I'm always willing to hear and say, you know what, you have a point there. And let's see how we can refine this, because there are so many experiences with these systems. You know, we're talking about large government systems that affect so many people.
Right.
I mean, I was knocking on doors last cycle and we were talking about Social Security, and this woman had her very particularly nuanced situation, being a widow, and how Social Security didn't work for her, and a very nuanced conversation I won't go into, but it was so different, right? That's something that you hear every day about our talking points about Social Security. And so I'm hopeful that more candidates go that route. I'm also hopeful that more candidates model that in their campaigns, because to me, like we talked about money before, that's the most important thing, because I don't think we'll change a lot of our system if we don't actually vote those people in. And what I always tell voters is, if you believe that's the problem, then that's the thing you need to most look for.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. If this episode made you think and you wish to reach out with a comment or a question, record your voice and send us the file at socialfabricpodcast@gmail.com, or record yourself on my website. I'll provide the links in the show notes below. Be sure to follow this podcast on Facebook and Twitter, and also join the exclusive Social Fabric Facebook group and engage with other listeners from around the world. Until the next one, be well.